That's pretty awesome. The the one. Blah, 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 blah.
Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
The Web Platform Podcast is a proud O'Reilly Media partner. As such, one of the benefits we provide our listeners, that's you, are special discounts such as 50% off of ebooks and 40% off of printed materials. So this includes but is not limited to books on web technologies, as well as other technologies you may be using. So your discount code is all caps PCBW. That's PCBW, all in caps. So head over to O'Reilly.com. That's OREILLY.com right now to get all your favorite tech books at much lower prices. This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 70. Today we're going to be talking about web components at Microsoft. So we have a guest panelist today, Wilson Page.
Hello, how's it going?
And myself, Eric Isaacson. And we have our guest from Microsoft, Daniel Buchner, who's been on the show quite a few times and has some interesting news about web components and Microsoft.
Great, yeah. How you doing?
Pretty good. So what's the new news? What's going on?
Well, other than the specs which are in process, as you know, Shadow DOM is all but finished as far as the first iteration. It's been implemented and landed in some of the development versions of WebKit. I know Mozilla's hot on the trail and has stuff going there too, and so do we. In Edge, so that should make its way soon enough. The other parts of the spec still being discussed a little bit. Custom elements, I think we'll find resolution on those. But obviously we have polyfills today that give us pretty much what you're going to see. Especially if you're using a library on top of those polyfills, you can use them today in production. I think they're ready. Custom elements is more of a semantic argument and how we kind of get around a few nuances, more or less. Than anything substantial as far as the APIs. So what I really want to announce today is the release of Xtag, the library, the first release that's Microsoft supported. Just did it earlier this morning. So we slimmed the library down. It's powerful. It's efficient. It's really not trying to be the end-all be-all framework for things. So we don't tack things like data binding and all that stuff, even though we've obviously done a lot to enhance it for this release. Still weighs in minified and gzipped under 5K if you don't need polyfills. If you do need polyfills, we pull all the polyfills required to do most of the functionality that you want to do for components in, and that still weighs in at just 20K. So we think of it as especially Microsoft, because they've been opinionated in the past about technologies, and for better or worse, as some developers know. And so what the tack we're taking is that we just really want to equip developers. And we thought Xtag, made a lot of sense because we don't want to put out a really opinionated framework right now to say, this is the way you build your apps from soup to nuts. What we're trying to do is say, here's something that's going to make doing the job of compiling custom elements and making those really excellent in isolation really, really fantastic, a great experience. And everything else, data binding, all those ways that the glue for an app, the things that how you put them together, we'll let you pick whatever you think is best. It could be Redux, it could be, maybe Palmer's data binding library. Doesn't really matter. We're fine with whatever you choose.
See, so the history of web components at Microsoft is pretty long. If you go back to like HTC files and all that, like we've talked about in the past. But
yeah. Chris Wilson, actually a guy that's at Google, first really was on the HTC spec, hypertext component files. And those are, interestingly enough, they look quite a bit like you would expect, like an HTML import to look under the current spec. So, a little bit different. They came up like the CSS behavior sort of attachment. That's the way they really imbued a lot of their elements, and that's interesting. They had some problems, but yeah, it did really start at Microsoft, which is kind of a nice trivia, I guess. And now we're getting back into it, so. It's kind of cool.
So as far as Xtag, like what's changed, what's new? Because we've had a couple episodes just on Xtag, And so you said you're not using the data binding. You've decoupled a lot of things, but like
Yeah.
what's being built? What's the history of Xtag over there now?
So we immediately, the one thing I did was we pulled all of our touch and mouse and pointer sort of handling. We had our own way that we were attaching essentially mouse and other types of input, like MS Touch events and all that other stuff, and pointer events. And so we actually moved to the pointer events polyfill. That's a polyfill that's included in Xtag. Inside that 20K is all the polyfills you would need for custom elements to work down to IE9. Also down to 3X series versions of Android. So we go farther than really any library because we're not taking this, do everything sort of viewpoint. So those are big things. We made sure the compatibility worked great in IE, so you can use this thing reliably on sites that are even, quite a bit older or have an audience that may have, a variety of browsers. And then we also did things, like I said, like we went to pointer events exclusively because that got standardized. And, obviously it was big for Microsoft. There was a huge win where they actually were out ahead of a spec and did a good job with that. So we wanted to make sure we surfaced that in the library. We also did, we slimmed the library down, took out observers. So we used to have a few methods where you could set up your own observers and essentially wrapped old mutation events and mutation observers together in one API. But really, it wasn't used very much, and it's kind of not. I don't think it's the best practice. I want to see people wait until slots come along and they have Shadow DOM to essentially do these detections of incoming elements. Turns out, to do the load and share of your component development, you actually don't need those things. Every component that we've developed thus far does not require sensing specifically what its children are. It can handle them no matter what. So, and that's a lot of components. I mean, if you look under the Xtag repository, there must be, 35, 40 components, and none of them are really hard bound to anything like that. So we tried to just make it as fast and efficient as possible. And in doing so, we saw huge speed increases across, how we handled events and the pseudo stuff, which was really important. Another big thing to get ready to be a Microsoft sort of backed product is, I'll be honest, our old site was kind of trash. Our docs were deficient. So we put some effort into that, and it's not complete. We don't have docs that are, as good as we want yet, but we have a foundation for the ones that are there. They're, really readable, very detailed, and you can check it out. It's there on the site right now. The entire project site is dog fooding more than ever now. We used to have a few custom elements of our own. Now the entire thing is composed of them. Along with that, what will be released next week is the actual template. We created a template site, basic app template, that the project site itself inherits from. So the project site has basically no JS code on the entire thing. It's pretty dynamic looking, but there's not a single line of unique script for the project site itself. There is a template that backs it that is like the whole layout and, the same thing except for color, logo, and, things you'd want to skin for an app. But other than that, it's completely driven off that. And even that template only has, I think, 12 lines of unique JS that kind of just power setting things like component navigation, through the deck of cards and all that stuff. So we're going to be releasing that probably in partnership with some of our other initiatives in-house, like Manifold.js, which is an app wrapper library. It's kind of uses PhoneGap under the covers, and a few other things like PhoneGap to get your apps going across all stores, whether that's iOS or Microsoft or Android, whatever. We're going to be partnering with Jeff Berthoff and the team that handles that to push this app template as something we see as, a great way to build your one-page app, dynamic app, a good foundation for that. So we're going to start trickling out pieces of Xtag and things you build with Xtag into other products in the DX space in Microsoft.
The most recent build, I think, of Edge has templates, web ORTC, which was kind of exciting to see, both of those picture elements. So stuff is coming out really fast, and I know that Shadow DOM is on the horizon.
Yep.
How fast do you think that will be, and would Xtag use that? Optionally.
When the Shadow DOM when it lands. So yeah, that's gosh, you reminded me of things that I forget that I pushed 10 minutes ago. We do a build now with all the polyfills. So there's the web platform polyfills for all of the web component specs. Our recommended build includes the code you would need for custom elements, that polyfill, and templates if it somehow isn't in a browser you use, which still is a few, obviously the later versions of IE. But we do actually do a build now that includes all the polyfills. And we have a couple little hooks inside of Xtag to do that. So like if you look in Xtag, there's this content property that we have on the top main declaration object. And the content property takes either a string or this multi-line comment function. And that's kind of where you put your snippets. Right, and that what it does is auto-create those HTML elements and inject them for you before your created callback fires, so that you can operate on them and your structure is there. So one thing we've actually had for a little while but never pushed builds to really advertise is the shadow property. So it's a lot like content. It takes the exact same thing. It takes a string or a multi-line function string and allows you to do the same thing but inserts it as a shadow root. So we actually have hooks right now. If you wanted to get that other build, I think that one is like 60 something K and change. That includes every polyfill. It's got the HTML imports. It's got Shadow DOM, everything. And then you can start actually having your DOM be not light DOM but Shadow DOM inside your components in Xtag. So it's supported, and we're planning on documenting it when we have that fully tested, and we're just as confident that one works as planned.
Do you think Shadow DOM will be native in Edge pretty soon, or do you think it'll be a couple months? Or
I think we should see it after the first of the year. I think you'll definitely see it after the first of the year. That's all indications that I'm getting from the engineering team and the folks over there is that that's when we should expect it. I can't commit to a quarter exactly, but sometime in quarter one seems definitely feasible, and I know they're working on it. So.
And I know we discussed, I talked with Travis about this too, over at the Edge team, that the HTML imports, and I think, Wilson, you wrote a lot about this as well, but the imports is sort of a competing type of spec with something like the module loaders from ES 2000X, whatever. And, do you think that something like that would be implemented first before imports? As far as Microsoft's stack would be concerned?
That is a question. It's a good question. I think the imports thing, they have similar concerns that Mozilla did, which is, hey, we have this DAG that obviously is represented and exposed through the module interface, like you were talking about, and that dependency graph, the way it resolves those dependencies is different than the HTML import spec, sort of is laid out. So there is a valid concern is, hey, why are we introducing two ways to pull things in that have their own DAGs that, do things a little bit differently than each other when maybe, kind of at a more primitive layer, we could tie those together. So I think that's the biggest open question. I personally have been agitating for and continue to support a declarative means for doing these things because I think there's some huge benefits there that you may or may not want to get through some imperative interface, just JavaScript, like a module thing. I think it's similar to how app cache and service worker happened. I think that it is good to have an imperative API come out first, personally, and then you could build really nice declarative stuff on top, because really the imperative stuff is giving you all the power, and a declarative thing is hiding a little bit to make it more friendly. And that's actually the way the web has been built, which is give you these top level things where there's a little bit of a black box to it. And what I think rightly that we're doing now as implementers across the ecosystem is we're going the other direction, through the extensible web manifesto and saying, let's make like really awesome things possible first at a very detailed level. And then when we see emerging patterns and how people are using them, then we can start reasoning about what it looks like to do these things through more declarative means.
And Wilson, do you have anything to add on that?
So does the new Xtags library, does it depend on an HTML import style approach of defining components? Or
no, not at all. Yeah, that's actually one way that we always have differed from Polymer. I held that opinion for, even when I was at Mozilla, that we'll start with the JavaScript stuff because it's the pipeline is easier. It's well understood by developers. All you have to do in Xtag is, xtag.register, which essentially is sort of this pseudo object. You don't have to have all the ugliness of, an object descriptor with its like value property and all that stuff. It makes it a lot easier to declare, and it's just through a script tag. So what we advise is, your component definitions that are going to be used immediately in the layout of the page that you want to render right away, put those in the head. Make them block. It's okay. That's actually the structure of your page. Just like, some native elements in HTML obviously block with their native styles until they're in place. We think it's the same thing. You're presenting sort of these components that are your app. So that's kind of what we say is put that stuff in the head, and then put the other ones that can be lazy loaded, like async loaded, either async or at the in the bottom of the body. And so that's all you need to know to develop components as an author. You need to know how to write one and include them through a script tag, which we thought was a great bridge for people and not unnecessarily reliant on a technology they aren't familiar with and kind of overloading them with more terms.
So as a user of Xtags, how do I define the more declarative stuff like the structure and the CSS? Where does that go in?
So right now, I know this is going to sound simplistic, but if you look at on the docs in the first getting started document, there's this section called content is king. And really there's this content property. So if I registered, xfoo as an element, that content property under my object descriptor, you could put either a string-based HTML snippet, or you can do this multi-line comment. And so whatever you put in there is going to be stamped out as the guts of your component, the light DOM. And so that's how you actually give it its structure. For CSS right now, we advise people write a CSS file and use any number of tools that are common in just about any development to compile your CSS files together and minify them. Doing the same thing, putting your dependent CSS for that first load at the top, and then asyncing whatever you can or deferring whatever you can for afterward.
Yeah, we had the developers from. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Wilson.
So where does the CSS for the shadow DOM go? Is that inside your content?
Yeah, that's inside your content right now. If you wanted to write that, so we haven't had a focus on shadow DOM purposefully. We will begin to now that we know that it's there. My advisement is still not to use it through a polyfill. We just see that there's too much of a miss in terms of the like one-to-one parity on the API. There's some nuances that are very interesting if you're going to use it in its polyfilled state. So while we're going to move for more robust support of things like you're talking about, having more definition around here's where the styles go for your shadow DOM, here's the affordance for this or that. We have the basic ability to insert shadow roots now if you use the polyfill or native. But again, like I would advise that it be in a native everywhere that you're targeting before you really use it.
Yeah, I'd imagine there'd be a lot of extra work if you did focus on it now.
Yeah, it really is. It's its own animal, and to make it a seamless and smooth experience as we have done for creating a component, which I'll state, just as a point of competition, but because why not? We have the shortest declaration possible. Like what you can do with this library is going to be shorter than almost any other piece of code you write with any component library. So, I think that's an awesome thing, and we want to make Shadow DOM through the library that awesome. And if I could go and code something really quickly and get something out there that kind of like, okay, it worked technically, it's using the APIs, but to really wrap it and give you something great, that would take time.
And the Shadow DOM too, when the slots come out, that's going to be very different than. So the polyfill is going to have to change, and that's going to take a little bit of time, obviously, and then working with CSS, obviously, because now you have to account for this blocking of CSS. So I don't think that Microsoft has commented on CSS variables. I know Travis said it's on his radar, but so how would you do like theming once that comes along?
So one thing that, theming, it's a whole issue, how do we do these things? How do we make them, transparent to developers? Those are things you can work through with like script and injecting style tags in, after into the roots and stuff like that. Like there's ways to do it. I think that, to make them really easy and give you a nice top level API, I want to see a little more settling of everything, right? Like how, even custom elements, right? I think custom elements API is solid for the most part, but I want to see how they marry together and play with it a bit. I would say like, some of the stuff with the CSS differences is like theming, like you said, variables. What are we going to do? Are we going to, have a circumstance where maybe Mozilla and Google have ran ahead and implemented that, and then maybe Edge hasn't. They haven't decided to yet. That would be hard to write a really nice API around, not knowing exactly what was going to happen. Because there's also, I don't know if Wilson, if you're familiar with this, but there's also, I think, in one of Tab Atkins' proposals or discussions about making HTML attributes able to be settable as unit variables, so that you could say like, like right now you can take an attribute and you can use it as a text for a pseudo element, something like that. There is some talk of making the ability to take the attribute and cast it essentially as a unit or as a value for other properties, which would be cool for theming, right? So,
yeah, that would be really cool. So you could just pass in things like colors and stuff through the attributes.
Yep. Yeah, and that's one way that you could do it. It's just there's numerous things and they're kind of swirling right now, so I kind of want to see how that shakes out. I
guess you could kind of do that in a quite a hacky low level way at the moment with like attribute changed and kind of then change the style property of particular nodes, but I guess it wouldn't be as elegant. Yeah, that's the thing. You hit on a great point. Is like there's ways to kind of do it right now. Like we have attributes and setters and getters all linked inside of Xtag already. That's really easy to do. And you could have a value that like imputes itself as a certain type or unit. But then again, you're just like manually setting all these values, and I don't know what the performance impact of that is, like at scale. So I'd have to really test it to make sure that we could be confident about it.
Doing the inline styles, which used to be bad practice, seems to be like another way that people are doing it, where they're injecting things at the last moment, like React is doing this, right? And like that's one way to get around it a little bit, I think. But the Strand library guys came on the podcast a while back, and they were talking. I asked them how they did it in theirs, and they had said they have a whole setup with Sass, so they do it all at build time. So they have their variables and everything, and then they plug it in. But that's like tooling. It's not. That doesn't help us if we're going to be using it in the browser, right?
Yep, exactly. Wilson, were you going to add to that?
You also did. Just back to the starting thing. Then if you're using preprocessor, then you also depend that your users of the component are using the same preprocessor. Otherwise, they can't theme the components that they're using, like the third-party components they're using. It gets a bit fiddly. But I was going to say, your earlier point, you mentioned that you weren't that concerned about when custom elements would be supported everywhere. Like you're pretty happy with the performance of the polyfill for that right now.
Yeah, no, we've seen fine performance. I mean, even we test list elements with hundreds or thousands of elements. It's even like mobile browsers will shrug it off. It's not, as long as you're not doing obviously insane looping inside of each created callback or something like that. It's not too bad. So I would say that actually was the most solid of all the polyfills, other than template, which kind of doesn't really do too much. So I had confidence in that. I think that most of the disagreements are with smaller engine-based things. Like how internally in the engine we had Jonas's proposal of like pseudo-synchronicity in terms of constructor calls and all sorts of ways we can do those things behind the scenes. I don't think a lot of them are going to affect the top level APIs. And even if you do, if you're using something like Xtag, obviously we could, say created change completely. It was like some event you added and not like, I don't know, property or whatever. I mean, under the covers, we can add those things seamlessly, and you can still be confident as a developer that all your components are going to work.
That's cool. Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, we know from enough experience with Polymer and other projects out in the wild that we need those 4 or 5 callbacks. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be there, like they're going to be properties on your class, and it's maybe going to look a bit more like a class. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, pretty much the same. But as like it sounds from a lot of discussions, there's like massive complexity in actually how each engine deals with those callbacks and upgrades and complexities like that. But I guess like you said, the user shouldn't need to worry about that and just
Yeah,
It
precisely.
seems like
Yeah.
from most of the conversation I've overheard that everyone's kind of agreed on this new sort of style. It's just when the browser calls all the callbacks and fires it all up, I guess, is the real problem.
Yep. Yeah, that's accurate. Mm-hmm.
So the next face-to-face, I think, is going to be custom elements, right?
Correct.
And that's going to be coming up soon, I think.
Yeah, I believe it's around the end of the year. Is that right, Wilson? Do you know?
I think the last email I read, they said they were going to do a Shadow DOM in December and a custom elements in January, but quite a few people said they don't think they needed a face-to-face for Shadow DOM to iron out the final things. But I don't know. That was like maybe a few days ago, so things could have changed.
The ever-changing world of standards.
It's usually in Mountain View, so are you able to get over there, Wilson? You're in London, right?
I may do, but there's most of the platform people working on this stuff are in San Francisco, so
yeah,
it makes more sense for them to go. I think Arne, the guy who handles all our standard stuff, will probably go to the January one. But December is not that convenient for us.
So I've been playing around. I was trying to get a client to start working, a very large corporate client, to start working with web components. And I went more the native route to try and sell that. And they wanted to do Internet Explorer 10 and up. So it fit in it and everything. Could have run it. But one of the things was the developers who were on were very familiar with Angular. They were familiar with Browserify and Node. And it was a challenge because a lot of them didn't feel like they could do everything that they were used to doing in something like Angular or whatever. And it makes sense because that's an application framework, right? It's not a component library. But it was not in their comfort zone. So that's why I wasn't able to get it done for that corporate client, although they were creating multiple apps that could share components across. It would have been a perfect fit.
Yeah.
But because of that the developer buy-in wasn't there yet, there was this fear. Will we ever get rid of that?
I think so. And so you can't talk about this subject without talking about React, in my opinion. And large frameworks like Angular, like you mentioned, because really what they do is they give people a safety blanket that covers everything you really could imagine that you would do inside of both componentization and data binding and all the glue you stick in your app. So people feel safe with that. They're like, okay, well, I have this one flavor of ice cream. It doesn't have any strange. I'm not eating this chocolate and then I get some strange like lemon sherbet, in the middle of it or something. Like I have this good feeling thing all the way through. I think that there is a problem in the way developers are thinking, and it's a bit short term. And it's fine for now. Like if you're going to make an app now, maybe it's fine to use state of the day instead of like state of the future. But things like React, like let's take that as an example. What it does essentially is say, okay, here's this one thing you can use, soup to nuts for your component creation. It'll do all your style stuff. It's going to send stuff from the server in this very unique way. It's going to render in our unique pipeline. It's going to use virtual DOM. It's going to step away from the platform. While I think React actually did a really good job, and to its credit, highlighted areas of the platform that may be deficient, I think it's wrong to step away from the platform altogether. And that's because we can do things to equip those use cases that it highlights. I think we've done that as a first step of web components. They're really a foundational for specs that gives us the basis for injecting into the parser knowledge of certain things that were black boxed. If I wanted to go forward with, say, a client like that, I would hope that in the future we do something like create like DOM tasks, which I've talked a little bit about with Jake Archibald on Twitter. Something that takes the 2 or 3 things that React really is specially tuned to do, which are essentially best practices, right? They're taking best practices and they're giving you DSLs and APIs for them. One of those is, kind of always, rendering the least amount of changes, or doing it in sync with, the render loop or whatever that is, right? Those are all things we've actually done before. There's, countless articles in Using Request Animation Frame for this, or don't set inner HTML 17 times, within a 10 millisecond period if you don't need to. They kind of just write an API that does all that, right? So what I would hope to see is that we do the same thing and bring like a web bindings family of specs, or web, whatever it looks like, web flow, and something that is DOM task that has all those things inside of it to kind of give you the other side of the fence. Because once you have the other side of the fence plus the actual render and the component side, you erase a lot of the internals of those libraries. Did I just ramble for way too long there?
No, it's interesting. I remember those conversations actually. There was two things that stuck out in my mind that Jake Archibald had said was, doesn't request idle frame help with some of this, which is coming in the next Chrome, or it may have just been released. Yeah. And we also have, the thing about React that was really the key for him, at least in this tweet, when he was saying was the diffing.
Yeah.
So that's what it does really well. So, I mean, are those things that are related to what you're saying? Like, should we look at that as part of the platform and look at that in the browsers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think diffing is an algorithm that needs to exist. I think diffing not only on injection of and creation of elements, but on property setting, right? Like diffing the ability of saying, look, I'm going to set this text content. Maybe there's some flag I can set on a particular component, like a regular old web component property, and say, I'm not only am I creating this custom element xfoo, but xfoo's inner text property. Every time, like maybe it's an upgrade I use through object, define property or something like that, another flag, like you have enumerable or whatever, an API of that nature where I can flag it and say, every time I set this property, just collect up the instances, and I want this tied to the visual render loop. Or I want this tied to a millisecond bound of 1,000 milliseconds every second. So don't actually change this, but once every second, no matter how many times I call it, and then at that point, just change it, based on time. So there's all these vectors essentially that you want to optimize for, and it's totally use case dependent. One could be tied to the visual rendering loop. Another could be less priority, so it could be every second. Another one, like you mentioned, could be on idle. So it's like not even important at all. It's like, go fire this off whenever you're free. So I think all those things really start making their way into APIs that we can, reason about inside the DOM.
Yeah, definitely. What's interesting too is I've been trying, like I said, to do more native types of stuff, and I've been looking at using Polymer Micro because it doesn't have that data binding, like you're saying. You don't have an X tag, and so I might look at Xtag for some of this too. But there was an article by Jan, oh my God, I'm going to butcher his name, Mishkovitz, I think I want to say. I don't know. I don't know if that's it. Sorry, Jan. but it was a really great article on Component Kitchen about exploring using this minimalistic library rather than having all or nothing. And I've been chatting with Leon Revel over in England as well, trying to figure out ways that we can look at some of these specs like imports and how I would use Browserify or Webpack with these things, modularizing this, and it's not easy. There's a lot of complexity, and because none of the browsers have the modules yet. So who knows how they're going to behave, but I was surprised, like most of the implementations, I've been using Babel, and most of the implementations are like one file where everything's loaded, like on load, and which I wouldn't expect to happen from that spec. So it's like really hard to gauge whether this would work or not. The syntax seems to work pretty well, but it's kind of like, I know Leon's working on a blog post about it, but it's interesting though. Like, have you guys explored some of the more modern JavaScript to be using in this?
Like mixing Babel with Xtag or the ES6, ES7 sort of feature-looking stuff.
Yeah, not even like using the transpilers to see what it would be like to with future specs.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I mean, like I toy around with all of those things pretty much constantly, and did when I was at Mozilla too. And I remember stopping Brendan Eich one time in the hall like 6 years ago or something. God, it was like a year after I started at Mozilla. And I stopped him in the hall and I was like, Brendan, why can't I just have a key that is like a variable plus a string, right? And at the time, I maybe it was just a miscommunication because we were like walking through the hall kind of quickly, and he's like, "Oh, we can't do that. There's some like crazy parser thing where it's like going to do this, and it won't be possible." And then now you have the computed keys with like the braces, and you can like have a variable plus a string, and like that is the object key. And I was like, so I've been playing around and like hoping that these things would happen, and they are. As far as using them in production, obviously our thing is I want to stay away from transpilers for JS and compilers and things like Sass and less for CSS, because exactly what Wilson said. The idea that you have to enforce not only like this higher level library on people, but then you have to enforce this entire tool chain, which they may need to learn multiple pieces of. And it like just use your library. It might take like, I don't know, a couple weeks to really get familiar enough to be effective. And I want people to be effective from minute one, back in browsers that are, in real life that they actually have to push production code to. What I would be cool with doing is like doing an ES6.7 version of Xtag, or maybe a TypeScript version, like having these flavors where, if you already have your transpiler, like you're already bought into Babel or something like that, then you could just include this thing, and it's like, obviously it'll be smaller amount of code because, they do a great job with these new APIs for JavaScript being able to do that. And give you the, the kind of flavor you want for this new wave. So that's something I would love to work on, I think, after we get finished with our first wave of, things for components here.
Yeah, I think my goal, like, I totally agree with you for frameworks, because that would be really, it's kind of frustrating when that happens. I agree. I think my goal for it is more academia, to see kind of what would work for flow, and looking at stuff like Steel.js. I don't know if you guys have used that.
I have not, actually. What is that?
So it's like a module loader system, but it's really cool because it optimizes your modules based on like how they're used. So it'll parse through the tree and figure out, okay, well, you're using this on all these pages mostly, so we're going to make a package for that. So rather than have the one file that gets loaded on load, these load asynchronously, right? So it's interesting, like their approach is very cool. Again, it's hard to say like how the module loaders are going to work, so this seems like a really good way to play around with this. I don't know how performant at scale it would be, though.
Okay.
So it might be very performant, but Webpack seems to be the most scalable out of these loaders I've seen, but the configuration is disgusting. It's like so much stuff you have to add in.
Yeah, it seems like that. Like each of these tools, man, they're, I use Grunt sometimes for things. I know people are like, now it's Grunt and Gulp. I saw an article just the other day. I don't know if you saw it, like rehab for Grunt and Gulp people or something. It was like something like that. Like
that was my talk at Nation.js.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, now I feel bad and stupid. All right. Damn it. All right.
No, it was totally all fun. I had a slide up there that said "Kill Bower," and it had the Bower logo with bullet holes in it. So it was, I like Bower too. It's just I kind of feel like that we should look at these alternatives to these things as well.
Yeah, for anyone watching the podcast, that exchange was pre-planned, and I completely knew exactly where the source of that article was. I just wanted to give Eric a attempt to get it out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to go check out my slides. I put them on Twitter. It's all good.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. The Bower thing, that touches on a good point. We use Bower actually inside Xtag, which is, I guess scary. We started it 3 years ago though, when the nested dependency resolution and like subchild resolution was just kind of a mess in NPM, and we looked at it like, man, we need a tool to do the job, And
Bower fit that job for a while, and now they've stopped development. Like there's no new features.
Yeah.
So that's kind of scary.
So we're planning on getting not off of it completely because we have so much there, but at least doing parity with all of the new stuff in NPM and all the new affordances that are there, because you kind of need to change with the time in some respects. So
yeah, and it's hard for like Polymer. I know is having difficulty. There's a whole article on the wiki for NPM. So because of the structure of Polymer elements, you can't switch to NPM. You can't just use it. Even in NPM 3, it doesn't fully flatten the tree enough.
Oh.
So there's problems with loading the Polymer library multiple times. So that's why we're stuck using Bower for something like that. So this is why I'm looking more into these module loaders.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would love to.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Wilson.
I was just going to say it'd be cool if you could just pass an option like at the user time when you're doing your NPM install, just say like, I just want to flatten everything and sort of go into Bower mode here and just say, I want to pick apart the dependencies and go, yeah, I have this one, not that one, blah, blah, blah. And just sort of...
It's crazy the work that they've done in NPM. Like, I'm surprised it wasn't even covered. There's just so much stuff that they've added.
But there was stuff to do with flattening, right? I kept reading that stuff with the dependency tree was going to get flatter, but
they did.
It still doesn't look completely flat to me when I used NPM 3. I still saw node modules within node modules within node modules. Maybe I was doing something wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
clown shoes 3 levels down. No, I'm just kidding. Not all the way. No, kidding.
So we went a little bit further down the rabbit hole of the web components. Sorry about that. But I mean, it's related. We're talking about Microsoft and web components. I think it's really interesting that now that Edge is becoming like a real competitor in there. It's like it is a real competitor. It's like this browser has more JavaScript features in there and all these things that we're still trying to catch up on the other browsers that are awesome. Like Firefox is awesome, Chrome is awesome, Opera's awesome by default.
No, I think you're totally right. I mean, in some ways, and it's getting to be an interesting landscape. I was at Mozilla for 5 years, so I know very well, both the history and how different browser vendors operate. It's different at Microsoft, but really, I see people actually really passionate here. And in some areas we're leading, in other areas we're definitely playing catch up still. But I think we're at a level now where the conversation can turn from people always assaulting the web as not being this foundation for apps because of browser X to a conversation of let's just streamline how we all implement the features we know apps need because we have the vehicles there to do it. We all kind of are bought into the same sort of development mindset for once, across the way. Even though people are calling Safari the new IE, which I think in some respects it is a little bit, I think that I've seen pressure on them, and I've seen an uptick even in Safari mobile and the regular one on the desktop starting to kind of care again and getting features out. And I see there are people saying we are working very hard. So I think we're at a point where all boats are kind of rising now and are going to be rising at the same at the same rate. So that's the positive thing for me is going from Mozilla and working on ensuring that the web wasn't this forgotten thing to now going to the organization that was maybe the reason why. And it's so ironic, I guess, that they're actually passionate about what Mozilla was passionate about from the beginning, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing at Microsoft now that I feel like needs to catch up is Windows. Oh yeah, and Office.
yeah. I've had interesting Word document editing things happen. So I'm getting used to it too. I'm filing like tickets left and right. But the thing is, they're all willing to make everything better. Like I think Windows 10, honestly, like I've been a Windows user my entire life. I've used a Mac for like a year at Mozilla, went back to Windows. So going over to Microsoft wasn't hard in that respect. I was already used to it. But even as a Windows user for life, I can definitely say that I was not a huge fan of Windows 8. I think it was a regression in terms of a lot of things. I think Windows 10 is fantastic. It's a great, it's not, again, it's not like Edge. It brought it up to this level where it's meeting or exceeding in areas. It's still playing a little bit of catch up in a few areas, but all told, I think it's a great modern OS, and you'll see things getting even better. Like one thing, for app developers out there, it's really important, and for me, I've used it, is the Docker. The ability to use Docker in Windows with a push button start. I've been really hard on Docker for like the last 2 years, saying that it was like some sort of cross OS, cross platform solution when it didn't work basically on Windows. And Windows and Docker have both put in so much time to make sure that all your dependencies for, all the things you'd use in a Node app, maybe like your Redis stuff, your Elasticsearch, all that is able to be push button started in Windows now. It's made, I don't feel like I need to pop into a Linux VM now in Windows anymore, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah, the command line in Windows still kills me though.
Mm-hmm. Siglin, man. Siglin.
I have to. I have no choice. I've tried PowerShell. I really have. It's been hurting me.
I get it. I mean, it's hard because like before this latest version of Docker, there'd be some things like internally it relied on Bash and it would like leak up, and you'd get these sort of conflicts. But they've resolved a lot of that stuff. So my thing to developers is for your front end, use components. Tie them together with whatever data binding you want. On the back end, if you want to develop on Windows, you have a component library for you. But we also have really great Docker integration. So there's no real excuses anymore. If you want to like test something out, you shouldn't just be constrained to testing that out on like our VMs that are available via the web. Like you should be able to run a machine, especially with Windows 10 being free, pretty confidently.
Yeah, Dan Wallin was on .NET Rocks maybe a month or two ago, and he was talking about Docker and the implementation with that, and there was like not going into details of that of the code or anything, but he was talking about what they were doing, and that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's cool, man. I love the idea that we're getting to a point where there doesn't have to be a monoculture in terms of both the web platform and all the other back end side of things. Like it seems like both of those sides of the fence are kind of they're both coming up on their own to really be there as a development platform for the web in the next year or two. I think we'll be able to say, unless you're doing like some crazy things with like APIs that are device specific, like it doesn't have this one gyroscope or something like that. Those may not be there, but 80% of the apps you can make through a web app, and they'll look and work just fine. And even I think there's been some what is it? Maybe Wilson knows this. Some progress on like web sensors APIs, like a generic web sensors API they're trying to get going to be able to have these sort of things quicker.
I don't know very much about that type of thing.
There's definitely web Bluetooth and web what is it, NFC, I think.
Okay.
And Chrome I know is working on those. I don't know if you, I think you guys are working on the Bluetooth one though.
Yep. Yeah, I know that's going right now. So yeah, the web sensors, there's a generic API that's under discussion for really rapidly pulling in like new forms of sensors without having to have, I mean, obviously there's going to be a spec for each one, but just like there is web components, there's a spec for each one of those features, but a way to get them into the pipeline quicker and sort of, modularized.
Yeah, if you're at the summit today, you should definitely talk with Justin. He's been working a little bit on the NFC one.
Oh, okay.
Justin Ribeiro. He's one of the other panelists on here.
Yeah, that's one actually. I know we kind of deviated obviously here for a little while talking about packaging, but
Sorry.
one way to bring it back in is to say, like, one thing that really hasn't been explored with components is what happens. Like I know Polymer does this. They have a lot of elements that are non-visual. Yeah. What happens when you can kind of bring in a component that is a little bit visual, but it's also tying to these cool APIs like sensor APIs and stuff like that? That's going to be kind of interesting. Like I can imagine maybe a parallax. Let's talk about like a parallax component, and maybe it has like parallax layer sub elements that are also custom elements, and then maybe the top level parallax component listens to the gyroscope to create that dynamic perspective like that iPhones have. And it does that with its layers and kind of tweaks its layers to adhere to a dynamic perspective. Like those are sorts of things in components that we haven't really tread on, but I could see being surfaced through components just the same.
Yeah, I've seen those in some Polymer elements, and I think the basic consensus, at least on the Polymer side of it, is that you separate those concerns so that you have an element that just does with the non-visuals, but you actually compose your visual element with that element inside of it. So then they can talk to each other that way.
So they kind of have this layered thing where maybe like that thing that's listening to the gyroscope is sort of an internal Shadow DOM wrapper type element? Is that?
It's a nested custom element inside that custom element.
Okay. Interesting.
So, but I mean, there's different ways to think about it too. So.
Yeah. Though I think the way that we would do it, generally speaking, and that is another feature of our library that we're going to start documenting in great detail, is the mix-in stuff. So being able to pull mix-ins that then themselves have mix-ins and do further sort of functional non-prototypical inheritance, almost like traits. That's something that we offer. And I would say, hey, if you want like the ability to link into this API and it offers maybe a couple linked attributes and 2 methods that it kind of brings into your custom element, I think that's kind of like the X tag way we would do that. Just as kind of a point of comparison.
Yeah, that might be a good thing to experiment with if you were going to do the module loaders. Because when I was using imports, it was really cool. I could have like as far as syntactically cool, I could have like shared functionality just by using exports. Export this, module dot exports if you're going to use common.js, but whatever the module is, it was easier to do that than to add it to the prototype, and and it was much quicker, but I don't know what happened under the hood. So
okay, yeah, I mean ours, pretty much what ours does with our mixins is to be kind of, you could have a mixin on your top level component, another mix, and your mixin could declare a mixin on itself.
Right.
And what we do is we essentially flatten those and wrap collisions. So if there's a hard collision like true false, the last wins. If there's something like an object, it'll crawl and merge. And then for functions, it wraps one another, kind of eating down the tree. So if you set like a foo method on every mixin you had, they would all be fired. They would just be fired from top to bottom, kind of like we do with pseudos. So that's how we resolve those. Eventually, they just get they're parsed the same as your xtag element definition. So it's the same looking objects. Everything's the same. So when you create a mixin versus an element, you're really not using a different API, using the exact same API, and we're just resolving the differences and merging.
Well, that's nice. One less thing to learn.
Yeah.
Now you have the library, you have this app example. It's going to be available on GitHub, I'm assuming, or
yep, yeah,
or
absolutely,
through modern.ie or something.
It's actually already there on GitHub. If you go under like the xtag repository, let's see, it's like basic app template, I'm gonna say.
What's been built also? Like, I definitely want to add that to the notes. Take a look. What's been built at Microsoft with xtag?
So I think we're just beginning this journey, right?
Yeah.
That's something that I can tell you what I think will be built. So this
That's
template.
fair. Yeah.
This template that we're doing, we're going to say, look, if you want to start your own Windows Universal app, basically an app that's written with HTML, CSS, JS that runs in the web, but also can run, in this like native Edge web view. We're going to say, hey, this is a great template for you to use. It works and operates in all the form factors you would want. It's going to look and perf great no matter what. And that's kind of the first. I think that's the first place we'll kind of up level it. As far as what we'll build into products, I think that you'll see over time that we'll adopt first a lot of our deb-facing tooling, like a project site here and there, maybe a component gets shipped. I know there's some shipping in Vorlon already. So xtag's being used in Vorlon.js, which is the cross-platform, completely agnostic debugging app. And so we already have stuff in there. I know that Babylon.js, their playground site, has xtag components in it. Mm-hmm. So it's starting to make its way. So when I said there was no component, I was lying. There totally is use of components already from xtag. But we're going to try and make, I think, concerted efforts to really get it in front of people.
Right. And I think Vorlon's on not 1.5. It's on an earlier one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, which is, it just was released today, so I wouldn't expect it.
It's okay. You can have high expectations. It's all right.
So the future's looking good for web components at Microsoft. I have to say, I've been trying to get on a lot of the smaller libraries to kind of show what they have, to get ideas and bring that out, and to see what's happening in the community. And I've contacted some of the small library owners, and even if it's like from some large companies, some of them have been totally dismantled. Where there's just no work on them, and it's a little scary, but
I think that's due to I think React's rise as far as kind of saying here's I had this will highlight I think where the difference is. I had a discussion with a prominent React developer, and he said to me, all we need is divs and JavaScript, and when he made that statement, I said to myself, like, man, there are some really good reasons we don't have divs and JavaScript, because we could have had that. We could have started and had zero semantics. The problem becomes all you're really doing in these libraries a lot of times is you're wrapping best practices we've had for years in a really easy, sort of consumable format. If you went to that flavor, which it really is, it's a flavor, a way of doing it, as we've seen with Redux and all the other things that have come out that kind of do the same thing, but just aren't that DSL or that exact expression. If you bind yourself to, not proprietary thing, open source, but from one company, where they may, just like these other component libraries you're talking about, decide to cease development one day, or we're going to change in 3.0 to do it completely differently, and now we're handling accessibility completely differently. Now you start telling places like JAWS and screen readers and all these other things, don't look at one standard semantic that you can digest and understand and rely upon for 10 years. Look at this one library and try and, chase them, as they go through their different gyrations of what they want to express. And I think that's a terrible future, and no one should want that. Everyone should want React eventually to be a library that's a tiny size and its DSL can still stand. And that, if you like it, that's great. But the internals of it should be handled by the platform.
Yeah, I agree. Wilson, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I really do hope that we don't all give up on the platform.
But what about just 1 year, Wilson? What if we just took 1 year off?
It's like Daniel said. I think we can, if we can get the right APIs, we can get the benefit of being that close to the platform. The platform can help us do our job and optimize those things that we need that you just can't do in JS land. So my hope is that, some of the stuff we learn from the libraries, like that's always happened, right? jQuery and stuff has always influenced the platform, and now probably React will end up influencing the platform. And we'll get something that's better than jQuery and better than React baked into the browser. So that's what I'm hoping, but we'll see, I guess.
I mean, one thing I want to highlight, I know we're going to wrap up here, but this is kind of a point of hope for the future. And a reason why people should trust in the platform is the web always lacks native and these kind of experimental library implementations. It doesn't necessarily, because it spans across companies and implementations and boundaries for countries and everything, right? I mean, to think that that's going to turn on the dime like a Porsche is ridiculous. And so for good reasons, it does that. But one thing you can always count on is under the guts in the browser has the ability to optimize paths that you will never see as a developer in user code. And so anything you do in that user code land, inevitably, if you deviate from the way the platform describes, can't be optimized as good as it could be if you had an API that was honed and tuned inside of the platform itself. So I think that's one thing to always remember, is that over time, your use of web components will become more performant and easier and smoother and faster. Whereas, will something like React or any other library that uses its own conventions get that benefit? I don't know. Some of them it might, because they might be general enhancements to the platform or JavaScript, but others, they could be hooking into pipelines that they'll never have access to.
Yeah, it's a good point. And if you look at the stuff that you guys have been doing with the browsers, I mean, it's been going really fast comparatively to several years ago. And yeah. I think, Wilson, you mentioned it the last time you were on the podcast, is, where finally everyone's coming together and talking about certain APIs and things like that. And to have that happen, people are like, oh, it takes so long to get these things put in the browser, the custom elements aren't there, Shadow DOM isn't there, but it's going really fast comparatively, and you gotta think, it's not like other platforms where if stuff breaks on version X, that's okay. The web has to always work. You have to be able to take a website from years ago, or you could take a website today and put it on a browser and it'll work. It just works, right? So no other platform that I know of really does that.
Yeah, it's a lot like Android 3 series. It's like Google was able to basically throw away that entire version of Android and say, oh, that was our one-off sort of Google TV tablet thing, but don't use it anymore, and just trash every app made for it. It's like, okay,
well. Just kidding.
We're still living with the scars of the disagreement years, though, which brings me into a question that I have for Daniel about Edge. That before Edge came out, or while it's in development, there was a statement that was made about supporting WebKit prefixes and having an ambiguous user agent. How has that been working out in terms of Edge being able to all the apps that people have built for maybe only WebKit on mobile? How's that been working out for Edge?
Actually, really well. We're able to recognize a lot of the CSS prefixes that give you things like, your flexbox, your other ones, things. Actually, flexbox was a tweener syntax, but definitely things, like all those animations, transitions, transforms, everything else is being recognized, and it's great. I mean, we have a lot of large corporate clients that, for some reason or another, some of their dev staff snuck in quite a few of those things that without them would either make the app look really bad or operate terribly. And they were so surprised that when they started up Windows 10, I've gotten so many emails where they set up preemptively like meetings where they're going to talk about the carnage that was to be, and basically like the calls are short. They're like, okay, well, we changed our user agent string sniff and I think it all works, but I've never trusted it. But like really the apps they're looking and working great, just, almost exactly the same. So I think that was a good decision. It was a necessary one. And, maybe it sucks that we had to do that, but it also shows us where never to go again. And that's the land of prefix hell.
Because we're facing like this issue right now that we're kind of being discriminated. Our user agent's been discriminated on mobile. On desktop, we're okay. But if you visit sites, even like google.com or facebook.com on a Gecko-based mobile browser, you'll be served low resolution assets, like 1x resolution assets on even like iPhone or like Nexus, like high-end displays, and you get a degraded experience, and I still think that's going to happen. Like if it's happening on google.com and facebook.com, like let's think about the rest of the web. So I think it was a very pragmatic decision that Microsoft made to do that. Obviously, there's a bit of risk, but I guess you have to say, okay, if we're going to be an ambiguous browser, like we have to do everything. We have to change. We have to support all the prefixes. You can't just do it halfway and go, oh, let's change our user agent, because then the whole browser breaks, right?
Exactly.
So I know people in Mozilla feel very strongly about the web should be compatible with all browsers. We have this web compat team which file bugs on the web platform. And they go off and then they'll pester Facebook and Google and say, hey, you're serving us the low resolution assets. But like, that's just, I don't know, to me seems like a very, very slow game. And I'd really like to see us going the Microsoft route, but I know. Daniel must know.
So I have, I actually do the web compat a lot. I interface with I just talked to Autodesk last week and I was up at Expedia. So we're engaged with these companies, and I kind of have to dig through. I know Mapbox, I was talking through their WebGL stuff. We had some pretty terrible compat bugs in the first version of Edge, and now the new one just landed, 13, and works perfect. So yeah, I mean, it's a struggle, and that's kind of that's the hard, begrudging job, I guess, part of my job that I hold, where it's like, I wish I didn't have to do it, but you do it for the web, right, to make sure everything works.
So Microsoft has taken the let's pretend, well, let's support WebKit prefixes and all that, but you're also still fighting the web compat battle at the same time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess hopefully when all the APIs align and we don't have prefixes anymore, then it's not going to be an issue. But I think right now, I think it has to be done. They can
cut this employee and save some money.
They'll still need you, Daniel, because we'll have something else that's destroying us at that point. There's always something.
Yeah.
So we're pushing up against time,
Okay.
but definitely thank you guys both for coming on today. We did talk about Microsoft, to be fair, and the implementation of web components, Xtag 1.5. Could you definitely give me those links at least, or
Absolutely.
any promo stuff so that people will know where to go for docs and things like that?
For sure, I'll get you links to everything. Yeah.
Okay. If people want to help contribute to the web platform at Microsoft, either through the Xtag, GitHub, or can they go to any other places to help contribute to this?
So I think that user voice is where you can uplevel your concerns, and those votes actually do matter. I mean, every meeting I'm in, we talk about what's trending. Our team and developer experience is a good outlet, and we're supposed to be the outlet to essentially take the more technical feedback. We have we have TEs, people that engage with the business on the business side of companies, and they take their business cases, but we're more like the developer version of that. So if you had something where you're like, this doesn't work really well in Edge, it works great in other browsers, or we need something that does X, and I think it's a widespread issue, I can synthesize those concerns and turn them into things that are heard by the PMs that plan the platform work. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So engage with me on Twitter, CSU Wildcat. I can get my other contact information out to Eric, so he has it to put in the video. And yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback.
Cool. And any last words, Wilson?
No, I think that's all. It's really interesting to hear from Microsoft what's going on. So thanks for sharing that.
It's an exciting time to be part of the web platform.
Absolutely.
So thanks you guys for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you. See you guys later.
Call for proposals is done and registration is open. And O'Reilly Fluent Conf is back in just a few months. Fluent, the web platform conference, will be held in San Francisco, California on March 7th through 10th, 2016. So get practical training in JavaScript, HTML5, CSS, and the latest web development technologies and frameworks. The Web Platform Podcast listeners receive a 20% discount when registering for the conference. So make sure you use the promotional code PCWPP20 to receive your discount. You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Eric Isaacson at eIsaacson
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.